Hi, this is Al-Husseini and I'm going to talk about how to build an MVVM-based architecture for Xamarin.Forms. First of all, let me talk a little bit about myself. My name is Al-Husseini and I work at the moment at Aramex as a technical lead. I have a various experience in ASP.NET Web APIs, Web Forms, and MVC. Also lately, I switched to mobile development to do iOS and Xamarin. You can interact with me through these social media links, and also you can check out my blog amjadhusseini.com. Also, let me talk about GeoTechies. GeoTechies is a tech community that provides education, help, and social events for IT professionals in Jordan, which helps you to network with our local IT peers. You can check out our social media links here on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or our website. What's the agenda for today? So I'm going to talk about MVVM, what is it about, and how we used to live without MVVM. And then I'm going to deep dive on each module of the MVVM, then talk about data binding and commanding, and then at the end, I'm going to show you a live coding demo on how to build MVVM-based architecture for Xamarin.Forms. So what is MVVM? MVVM stands for Model View View Model, and it's a design architectural pattern that is well known ever since WPF and Silverlight, and it's based on top of MVC pattern. It's very handy for data binding and commanding, and it's popular ever since XAML and WPF Silverlight. And one of the popular or the biggest benefits of MVVM is SOC, which stands for separation of concerns, and you don't have to you don't tie together any model or view or the MVC as we used in the MVC. Each of the modules that we have is separated and it's easily testable. So, how we used to live without MVVM? We used to have the view, which contains the view code and the code behind, and it's basically a partial class that lives behind the view code. Usually it's XAML code. And the problem is with this code behind, which contains a lot of code that interacts with the model, and it might give us a network calls and return the results from the service methods that we have, and set the values of the results on the view code. The main problem with this approach is that we have none nearly impossible way to test it. So at the same time, it's tightly together with the model, and there is no separation of concerns, which is one of the biggest benefits of MVVM. So, entering the MVVM approach, we have this abstraction layer called view model, which lives on top of the view itself. This view model consists of two kind of properties. The first one is the state and the other one is the operation. So the state is the bindable property that can be binded to one of the view properties that we have. For instance, if we have a customer relationship management system and we have a customer model, this customer has a first name and last name. So the first name can be bind to a label that happened to live in the view itself, and the last name also can be bind also to another label through the data binding that we have. The data binding that we're going to show you at the end of this session will have this property like the text, and it can be binding to this model. At the same time, we have the change notifications, the feature that if there is like any property or any bindable property that has to be changed, it can notify the view as well. So if there is like a change in a first name, it will notify the view, in which in return it will change accordingly. At the same time, it can be a two-way binding, which if the user like enter a new first name for the customer, it's going also to be reflected on the view model. Talking about the operations, if we have a functionality that happens to live also in the view, which will save the customer record for us, we will end up with a new property which is of type of command, and this can be triggered from the view itself. So when the user taps on the save customer record, it will trigger a command that happens to live in the view model, and it will trigger a certain functionality like a service functionality. At the same time, it will happen to interact with the model. So the model only interacts with the view model. There's no interaction with the view itself between the model and the view, which is one of the biggest benefits of the MVVM, separation of concerns. Still, it's good to mention that the code behind will be massively reduced in the view layer. In return, we will have the code organized in the view model, which, as we said, it's a glue between the view and the model. So most of the CRUD operations and the properties that happen to reflect the model itself will all live in the view model. So if you want to talk about the functionalities of the view here. So the view here mainly consists of the user interface, which consists of containers controls. So if we were talking about classic Xamarin, it's going to be the activity in the Android, or the view controller in the iOS, or the XAML view in the Windows phones. At the same time, if we were talking about Xamarin.Forms, we're talking about XAML itself. So this user interface binds to a view model instance. So we can have multiple instances. Each instance is going to handle a view itself. Bear in mind that there will be no business logic happening or living in the view layer here. So mostly it's going to be just user interface code. Again, this is the main purpose of separation of concerns. So talking about the second layer, which is the most important layer in this video, is the view model. The view model is the glue between the view and the model. This is why it's called view model. And it exposes the state and the operation for the view model. So if we have a property for the model that we want to expose, it's eventually called a state. And if you have an operation like saving a customer record or deleting a customer record or whatever, this is called operation. These are exposed in the view model. It handles the flow of the application mainly. So as we said, we have instance of each view, and it contains the whole CRUD operations or binding the properties. And it's testable. It's easy to test. You can write unit tests for that view model. And the most important thing that there will be no reference to UI elements in the view model. So as we said, separation of concerns, the view has its own UI elements and the view model exposes the state and operations. So no UI elements will be in this layer. So the final layer of this design pattern is the model. It represents the data model and the data services, which going to invoke and is going to return data for the view model, in which the view model is going to handle. This is probably the simplest layer with the MVVM approach. So now let's talk about a little bit about data binding. So we're gonna deep dive on data binding. So as you can see from this graph that we have data binding, which is an engine that sits in between the binding source and the binding target. The binding source is an in-memory object. This in-memory object consists of properties, as you may know. So for instance, if we have a customer record, we have the first name, last name, gender, whatever we have properties for that record. And this record can be binded to the binding target, which is a UI element that has a property. So, for instance, if we have a UI element which is a label and it has a property which is a text, we can bind this together. So the first name can be binded to the label with the text property. And as you can see, we have these arrows that sits between the data binding source and the data binding with the target binding here. This means that you can also do this in vice versa way. So if we have a text box that happen to live in the UI element and the user writes anything for the customer name, it will be reflected directly to the binding source, which is an in-memory data. So this engine comes built in with Xamarin.Forms. Some of the Xamarin native, or actually all the Xamarin native that doesn't have this feature enabled or doesn't have built in with the Xamarin native. So if we're talking about Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android, you have to use one of the libraries or the popular libraries that exist at GitHub. One of them is MVV Cross or MVVM Lite. So you can use all these libraries in the GitHub in order if you're doing Xamarin native. But if you're doing Xamarin.Forms, it comes for free. So the binding source, as we said, it's a single object or a collection. It doesn't have to be related to the database. It's just an in-memory object. So this one here we're talking about has a properties, and these properties going to be binded to the UI elements. This UI elements, if you want to bind it to UI element, we have to use the data binding engine. As I said, this data binding engine comes for free with Xamarin.Forms. We don't have to write any code to do this. So this is one of the amazing features for the Xamarin.Forms. And there is like a synchronization feature. So if you write something on the object or the property, it will be reflected to the UI element and vice versa. So there's a synchronization mechanism. At the same time, there's a conversion functionality. So if we're talking about like date and time, you can convert it in a date time format. So this is it's not gonna we're not gonna talk about this one in this video, but it's good to mention that we have this kind of feature. Lastly, we have the binding target, which is the UI element. If we're talking about Xamarin.Forms, it's the XAML UI, and it can be also part of the Android or iOS apps. But as I said, you have to use one of the libraries, the well-known libraries. So if we have an object, in-memory object, it can be binded to, let's say, if we're talking about like a transportation application, this object can be binded to the context of the object can be binded to this part of the UI, which has the from the transportation from or to, like we're talking about from London to Manchester. Uh, these properties can be binding to this object, and the departure, which is the 11 o'clock, it can be also binded to this object, and it can be converted to a certain time or date format. We have the save functionality, which is a command. It also can be binded to one of the properties, which is a command property living in the view model. Also, it can be binded to collection. So we have to define the context of the binding. So if we're talking about like a data list or list view, shall I say, it can be binded to a number of objects, which is a collection actually. So each item in that view list will be binded to a certain object. So we can do some iterations on that one, and each iteration we can bind properties to the UI elements. One of the coolest features of the data binding engine that comes for free with Xamarin.Forms is the property changed, which is conforms from iNotify property changed. This iNotify property change notifies any of the other properties of any changing that happening to any property to another property. For instance, also it notifies the UI as well. So if we're talking about if we're changing the from or to in the object that we have, it will also change it in the UI. And we can also, when I show you the demo, we can also notify other properties that you should change or notify the UI. So if we're talking about changing the from, it might also need to change the to or notify that to property that you should change as well. Or if we have a display message that we're going to show to the user, which consists of from and to addresses, we have to notify that display message for the user to get changed accordingly to these changes that we have at the moment. Last but not least, the commanding functionality. The commanding functionality is the one that I talked about. It has the feature of wrapping the command and binding it to a certain functionality. At this one, we have a calculator. You can do operations just using view model instance. So let's get started. Let me build a demo for the Xamarin.Forms, which consists of data binding and commanding. Shall we? So, in order to start with the demo, let me first tell you that I'm using Visual Studio for Mac, which is the community edition, and I have downloaded a demo app that James Montemagno with the Xamarin Show has on his GitHub repository, which is I'm going to put it in here, down here. So, as you can see, this is the Visual Studio. If you want to build a new Xamarin.Forms app, you just go with a new solution. On the multi-platform section, you can choose the app and the Black Forms app, which is in C#. But I have already done that. Let me show you the structure of the app. We have a view models folder and a models folder as well. Inside the models folder, we have the contact.cs. It's just a Poco class, and we don't have any property for that one, just for the sake of this demo. And we have the view model, which is a view model, which is the one that we talked about right now. It is for adding a new contact. And we have the XAML page, which consists of labels, entries, and stack layout, switch, and 2 buttons at the end. And we have the code behind for that one. So let me show you or run the app just to show you how is the user interface for that one. I'm running the iOS simulator because I'm using a Mac, and it's easy to do that. The emulator comes for free with Xcode. So let me just show you the simulator here. I'm building the app. Actually, I've run the Android simulator, but let's hope it works fine because this is a preview version. So it's deploying on the device. I have the Nexus 7 Marshmallow emulator. Okay. So it's installing the application on the device. Let me unlock it right now. Okay. So we have this is the name and the website, and we have a toggle here or a switch, which is consists of the best friend, if this guy is a best friend or not, and we have open website and save contact. So let's get started with having to bind the XAML here. So in order to start with the binding here, I'm going to start with setting the showing you the view model first of all, And as you can see, we have a properties. We have properties in here: the best name, the name, sorry, best friend, the name, display message, a website is busy, and launch website, which is a function, and a save contact. These properties uses these variables that here. So let's get started with a name, which I'm going to say Amjad Husseini, which is my name, obviously, and the website. So I'm going to write my blog. So as I said, these are the properties, and this is the display message, which is show you, which is a getter only, and it's going to show you a display message for the users. Going back to the XAML, so if you want to bind properties to the controls, we use this syntax. So for the full name, we can say text equal, and we open the curly bracket, and we say binding, sorry, full name. I hope I'm writing the property right. It is name, it's not a full name. And we have website. Let me copy and paste that one and change that one to website. Oh, I haven't closed the curly bracket. Okay, we have the best friend. It has a switch, and this one is a Boolean value. So if we're talking about is toggled, you can say binding best friend. Let's close that one. But last but not least, I'm going to also bind the text of the display message, which is binding display message. Close that curly bracket. So in order to bind or enable the data binding engine, we have to go to the code behind and define the context for the data binding. So if you're talking about binding context equal, we're gonna have a new instance of our view model. So our view model named add contact view model, we're having a new instance of that one and just assigning to the binding context. It's good to mention that the binding context can be also assigned to a certain container or a certain control, but we're assigning it to the whole page. So the binding is going to happen to the whole page. So after doing that, let me run that code again, and it should bind the default properties that I just set, which are the name and the website. All right, cool. So as you can see, we have the property name, which is defaulted to Amjad Al-Husseini, which is my name, the website, the blog, and it's binded from the binding context that we did, and from the attributes that we did on the XAML UI elements. And we have the display message here. So your new friend is named Amjad Al-Husseini and is not your best friend. So if I'm toggling this one, it doesn't change the display message. Why? It's because we don't have the an identify a property change confirmation or the interface that we talked about in the slides. So if in order to do that, let me show you how can we modify that one from the code behind. So as you can see, we have the class. I can say I notify property changed. And that I notify property change it does confirm or does implement one method. Let me implement that interface. it implements the property change event handler, which is it's an event handler. And if you go to the definition of that event handler, sorry, you can see that it takes the sender and it takes property change event args. Okay, that's cool. So we can do this. We can do a void. Okay, it's a method that we can name it on property changed, and it takes a parameter of type string name. This one we're going to invoke from any setter of the properties that we have in order to invoke the property change handler. So how can we do that? We can say property changed dot invoke. It takes two parameters, which is the sender. The sender in that case is this, or self in other languages. And the property change event args is, uh, uh, as I said, it's a class. Let's pass it property changed event args, and this one takes. Let me show you from the IntelliSense. Property change args. Um, it takes. Hold on. Sorry. I just want to show you from the IntelliSense. It takes the property, but I'm not sure why it doesn't show you guys from the IntelliSense, but I'm gonna show you by clicking on the define. Um, so it's property change actually. Property changed. My bad. Yeah, it takes the parameter here. Oh, sorry. Property changed event args, and it takes name, so it's a property name. I'm closing here by this. Oh, sorry. I have to pass a new instance of that one. My bad. Yeah, works like that. Anyway, so in order just to notify other properties that this one has been changed, you can in each setter you can just invoke on property changed, which in order it takes the property name, you can pass it as best friend as a string. But sometimes this is not the best practice to do that, because sometimes you might want to change the property name, which is in that case it's not gonna be a strongly typed, and that way changing a property name will not change that one. So we can instead do this. We can say name of best friend. That way it's gonna send it as a string for the name. Another way to do that is to have caller name, member name, and we can give it a default value here, an empty string. That way we can pass it as empty string or without parameters, and it's by default going to take the caller member name, which is best friend. That way it will gonna be make it more neat. Yeah. So best friend, also best friend, changing the best friend. Also we need to notify other property, which is display message. Okay, so we're gonna pass name of the display message property, Let me just copy and paste. Also the name, also we're gonna notify the display message. So for the website and is busy, we only need to notify itself or the UI. We don't need to, sorry, it's not on the get, it's in the set. So by doing so, we're notifying the UI that this property has been changed and you should adapt with this one. Also is busy, we're doing that as well. So in that way, when I change the name or the best friend, we're going to tell the display message that you should uh, uh, re-evaluate yourself and show it to the UI again. So let's check what's happening if we do that at the moment. I'm running the app. Okay, we have the name. If I like erase the name, as you can see, the display message is adopting again. And if we put a breakpoint in here, and I just write A, it will tell the display message property that you should re-evaluate yourself. And let me run that again. Let me remove the breakpoint and just write Amjad again. And the display message is your new friend is named Amjad and is not your best friend. So if you toggle the best friend, we're changing the display message as well. Cool, huh? Okay. Also, it's good to mention that if you're binding a name, you can also define the binding mode. So if you take a look at Xamarin.com and the developer pages, you can see that there are four modes at the moment for the Xamarin.Forms. The first one is the one-way mode. The second one is two-way, and the third one is the one-way to source, which is as it's just one way from the UI to the source only. And the last one is the default one. I'm gonna post or put the link for the modes so you can check it out. Um, and you can see the description of each mode. But if you want to do the mode for a certain property, you just say mode equal one way. Okay, that way you will define uh, the mode for that one. Okay, let me stop the application from here. And remove the mode in here. So that way we're doing the data binding. Let me show you if I want to show the indicator, the activity indicator here. We have to bind it to is running to a property which is a Boolean property. So let me say binding is busy. So whenever we have is busy as true, it will run the activity indicator. Okay. So if you go to let's say the set here, and if we have a name that starts or let's say equals to Amjad, my name, it will change the is property, is busy property. So let's say is busy equal. So if the name is equals Amjad, we're gonna return true, otherwise false. Yeah. So if the name is Amjad, we're gonna say that this is busy property is true, otherwise it's false. And when we are setting the is busy to true or false, we're going to notify the UI that this one is changed. And that way, it will show us the activity indicator. Let's run the application. Okay, so let me just remove my name and write from the beginning my name. As you can see, if I write Amjad, it will show us the is busy indicator or the activity indicator. Think about it that we can do this once we are doing a network call. For instance, if we're saving the contact here, and let me just write space, it will return false. In that case, it will not show the activity indicator. And as I said, if you're doing a network call, it will show the activity indicator at the bottom, just by getting or setting the value for the is busy to true or false. That easy. Okay, so as you can see, also we have we already covered the data binding at the moment for the for this form in an easy way, just by setting on property change and passing whatever you want to adopt or to evaluate as well. So it's as easy as this. Okay, as you can see from the emulator here, we have open website and save contact. These are buttons, and these buttons should adopt a command. In that way, open website will open a website, which is the website we defined here, and the save contact is going to save the contact for us. As you can see from the code, we have already two methods. The first one is for launching with a website, and the other one is for saving the contact. But as you can see, we're defining the is busy true or false just to like indicate that there is a network call, and we have a delay for 4 seconds just for sake of the demo, just to tell the user that we're doing a network call at the moment, just to hold on. And then we're going to show an alert that this contact has been saved. Yeah. So in order to do that, it's as easy as this. We're going to define two command properties. So we're going to say public command. The first one is launch website command, which is a get property. And the other public command as well is going to be save contact command. Also, it's a get. These commands can be binded to the buttons here. But how? Okay, so binding them is going to be as easy as this. You just say command equal binding launch website command. Close the curly bracket. Let me check that I wrote it website. Okay, I wrote it in the correct way. So the other command is I'm gonna bind it to save contact command. That way, we are triggering the commands from these buttons. Okay, sorry. So if we want to trigger these commands, we have to initialize these first. So if you want to do that, we're gonna say launch command equal new command. And as you can see, these commands takes an action, or it might take also an action with with a function called can execute. Okay, let me show you something from the command itself. Command is a class, okay, which inherits from or inherits iCommand, That class, sorry, okay, let me go back. Okay, it has properties and functions. The properties that it has can execute and change can execute. Change can execute is a method. Can execute is a property with a boolean. Also, sorry, can execute is a method. These are methods. These methods we can be executed. I'm gonna show you in a moment. And they are useful for the commands. And we have also fields. These fields are read only. Let me show you how can we pass command parameters. So it takes an action. Let me just pass launch website. And if we wanna also save contact command, we can say new command. And since it's an asynchronous one, let me just say asynchronous await save contact. That way, we are initializing the commands from the constructor. And by doing that, whenever we trigger these commands, they are initialized and they have an action. Okay. So if we run the app, okay, if we run the app and we say open website, it will trigger this command. And by triggering this command, it didn't work. Why? Let me double check. So launch website. If I wrote it in a correct way, hopefully. Let me just double check that I wrote the save contact as well in the right way. And we are doing the initialization in here. Yeah, that's right. And these are public. Yeah, let me run that again just to double check. Okay, open website. Save contact. Yeah, so save contact works fine. 4 seconds and then showing to the alert. Apparently, let me just put a debug in here just to make sure that it is triggered. Oh, yeah, it is. So apparently, uh, there is something wrong with the website. I think is that why. Okay, open website. Step in. Okay, back to Smith. Yeah, it's because of the website itself. This is my blog. So, thing is, if you yeah, if you tap on one of these commands, it will be triggered. So as easy as this, just triggering the commands from the UI, and it will trigger the command that's happening in here. Okay, um, and as easy as this. Okay, one last thing, which is a very cool feature that it's really good to mention. We can also disable or enable these buttons while the command is being triggered. How can we do that? So as you can see, we have I have these code, which is a commented code in the constructor, just for the sake of this demo. Let me remove these ones and uncomment these code. Okay, so you remember we talked about the action, passing the action, and now we are talking about passing also a function which is going to trigger or return the is busy is true or false. If the is busy is true, then you will disable, or you will tell the command that you cannot execute this command. And if it's false, it will tell the command that it can be executed. And that way, it will enable and disable the button itself. Okay. Um, so in order to do that, on the launch website, we need to tell the command that it needs to reevaluate. How can we do that? So we're just saying we can call the command, so the launch website command, that you have to change can execute. That way, it will reevaluate. It will reevaluate the command to check if the property is being changed or not. Okay. So let me do it in the save contact, since we're changing the edge is busy in here. Okay, we can say the launch website command and the save contact command change can execute. It will reevaluate the can execute, and it will disable and enable the command itself. So once the is busy is false, it will return back again. Oh, sorry, I wrote it in the wrong way. This should be here. This shouldn't be in here. So, because it's not related only to save contact, it's related to the save. Sorry, is busy. Once it's being set, you have to reevaluate the commands in here. So let me run that again. I apologize for this one. Okay. So saving contact will change the is busy, and changing is busy will trigger these two functions. Let me put a breakpoint in here. Save contact, it will change and tells the command to re-evaluate the can execute. So we're doing so, and these buttons are disabled at the moment. So once we pass the false value to is busy, we're re-evaluating again the commands. So it will show the alert, and back again these commands are enabled. Pretty cool, right? So this is it. This is the demo that we're talking about. We covered the data binding and we covered the commanding. You can check my blog, amjadhusseini.com, for more tutorials on Xamarin. And thank you guys. Have a good one.